Hello and welcome to the second ever episode of Chatting Lit podcast. We've gone very international for this one. It's not even the same day for all of our guests. We've got Seth over in Australia. Seth is Waste Mailing List on Instagram if you want to follow him over there. And we have Noah joining us all the way from Atlanta. Noah has his Instagram page, everyone underscore who underscore reads, as well as his booktube channel, Everyone Who Reads It Must Converse. So get following those guys, they're both fantastic. Today we're going to be talking about Thomas Pynchon, the often, how you would describe him. He's often seen as mysterious, seen as difficult author of works such as Gravity's Rainbow, Mason and Dixon, Crying of Lot 49. And before we kind of get into the questions, I'd also like to give a shout out to Matty Markwood, who is the moderator of the Pynchon subreddit. He's also on Instagram as the Of Literature. And Brad Wetzel, who Seth introduced me to, well, I've never spoken to the guy, but he introduced me to his work. He's on Instagram at Brad's Per Second, and Brad is undertaking the rather, God, I can't even more words out, mammoth task, I'll go with. Gigantic, apparently speak at this time. I'm tired. It's the night over here. Task of trying to illustrate Gravity's Rainbow. I think someone's already done it. There was an illustrated Gravity's Rainbow on Amazon.
That would be Zach Smith.
There you go. So yeah. So guys, thank you for coming on. It's a pleasure to have you both. So we'll start with a bit of a basic question. How did you first come across Pynchon's work? So Noah, if we start with you.
Well, I was very young when I first came across Pynchon's work, and I think it was kind of the way that most people come into contact with Pynchon, just through word of mouth or seeing Pynchon, a work by Pynchon written somewhere or something, and it was Gravity's Rainbow. It was just this unbelievable work. You know, you have to read it. It's going to blow your mind, all this kind of thing. And I was intrigued, and I got it, and I read the first couple of pages and I put it down and was like, what is this? How do you, what is going on here? So I didn't start with Gravity's Rainbow, but that was the first kind of introduction, to what Pynchon or who Pynchon was. And then I did what I do with a lot of authors. I try to go chronologically through their work. So I read V, which is, a very fractured kind of work that didn't, I don't want to say it gave me my bearings with Pynchon, but it was easier to read, and I was able to go into that. Then the Crying of Lot 49, and then I was off. So I usually read a Pynchon every year or 2 years at the most, and have been kind of saving and savoring these last ones, because we don't know if we might get another one from him, right? And the mystique of Pynchon, that you kind of alluded to in the beginning there, is definitely was a draw for me coming into contact with Pynchon first. Is, this reclusive author, you don't even know what he really looks like now, doesn't do interviews, doesn't want the public persona of any kind. He lets his work kind of speak for him, and love that kind of thing, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It was one thing when I first started reading about him, like you said, he doesn't do interviews. There's not a lot known about him. There's barely any photos. And that's something we'll talk about later. I know, Seth, when we were sort of bouncing ideas together about this episode, you mentioned his reclusivity, and we'll come on to that in a bit. So Seth, how about you? What was your first sort of contact with Pynchon's work?
Yeah, look, I came around to him a little more kind of organically than I do books these days. I feel like the majority of the exposure I get to things nowadays is usually through various social media channels, whether that be Goodreads or, the book community on Instagram. But this was probably 4 or 5 years back now right after what I've kind of affectionately termed my reading renaissance. I had just graduated my undergrad and I had finally had some time on my hands to actually learn to enjoy reading again. So I was picking up kind of anything and everything that caught my mind, or my eye, I should say. And around that time, there was a particular used bookseller in my city back home, Vancouver Island, off the coast of British Columbia. It's Russell Books, little shout out for them. And there was this one guy there, and I'm going to be honest, I don't even remember his name, which is a bit of a regret for me because he was incredibly helpful and kind of influential into my reading as well. But I remember in the early days of picking up books again after years and years of not reading, he would make a couple of recommendations to me and I would take some home and then come back and tell him what I liked. And I don't remember what I told him exactly what I was into at the time, but I remember the day specifically where I was asking for some recommendations and he gave me 3 names. He told me to read Paul Auster, Don DeLillo, and Thomas Pynchon. And I remember that day I did buy a DeLillo and an Auster book and I read those, but it was a little while before I came to Pynchon. I just kind of circled around him because I remember Googling him or something at some point and keep seeing the word difficult, complex, Byzantine, labyrinthian. And I'm just like, ooh, I don't know if I'm ready for this yet. So I kind of circled him for a while. And then a couple of years later, I picked up a Crying of Lot 49 from the library and just immediately taken by it. And kind of every 6 months to a year now, I usually try to nail down another Pynchon book. At this point, I've done Crying of Lot 49, Mason and Dixon, Vineland, Gravity's Rainbow, Inherent Vice, and I think that's it off the top of my head. That would leave V, Bleeding Edge, Against the Day, and Slow Learner. Yeah, so that's me in a nutshell.
Okay, you guys have both read more than I have. My first exposure to Pynchon was really a little bit stranger than that. Years ago on Facebook, I did some really stupid quiz. It was like, "What novel are you?" And I got Gravity's Rainbow, and I'd never heard of the guy before. Started, looking into it. Okay, thought this book sounds interesting. Bought a copy, and then sort of like you with this whole idea, he's difficult, and it's quite a weighty book. It sat on my shelf for over 10 years, at least, sort of staring at me like, "You'll never read me. I'm too hard for you." And I've got friends who are more intelligent than I am who both have read it. One gave up, one it took him a couple of goes, and they was like, "Oh God, it's such a hard book." And so I started off, and this is something we'll talk about in a sec, kind of where to start with Pynchon. First read The Crying of Lot 49, really enjoyed that. Then Inherent Vice, really enjoyed that. Then Bleeding Edge, which didn't quite like as much, but it's still, I think those Inherent Vice and Bleeding Edge are often termed Pynchon light, as kind of like introductory text to him maybe. And then eventually got around to Gravity's Rainbow kind of towards the end of last year, the start of this year, and really, really enjoyed it. But I'm glad that I read some of his other works first because I think it gave me an idea of the kind of writer that he is. I still have this really abiding memory of, it's going to sound really weird this, but about 10 years ago, some friends and I were going to Iceland on holiday, and we were flying from London. We were driving down, and we were told our flight was going to be delayed by several hours. And we were there at the airport at 5 a.m., no sleep, absolutely just beyond tired. And I saw someone sat on the floor reading Gravity's Rainbow. I thought, who reads this at 5 a.m. on no sleep? Like, what kind of a crazy person are you? And that's just stuck in my head. That was 10 years ago. It's literally, it's pretty much, yeah, it was 2011 we went to Iceland, just about 10 years ago. So yeah, that's still stuck in my head to this day. But having finally read it, it is quite a difficult book, and we'll get onto that in a bit, I think. But yeah, I am glad that I finally got around to it, and I am looking forward to reading some of his longer works. On that note,
could I just interrupt you for 1 second and ask a super quick question?
Go on.
What did you plug in to a Facebook quiz to have an algorithm tell you that Gravity's Rainbow is the book for you?
Please.
Like seriously, are you into coprophagia rockets, cults, like what,
Hallucinogenics.
seriously, yeah, exactly. I'm just thinking, like, good Lord, I do not want to know what's inside the depths of your Facebook profile.
All of the above. All of the above. That's the answer to that.
Yes.
I can't. I honestly can't remember. It was one of those. They used to have these stupid quizzes back in the day. What country should you go to on holiday next? And it was around that time when Facebook sort of opened itself up to a wider audience. It originally started out, didn't it, as just people who were at universities or colleges around the world. Then I think it was anyone who'd been to university or college, and then it kind of screwed itself open to the general public. So yeah, I literally can't remember what it was that put in there, but I got Gravity's Rainbow, which was quite interesting. So on that note, we've kind of touched upon this already. I know, Noah, you've actually done a video about this, so we'll go with you first. Don't worry, Seth. I'll let you answer some of the questions first. After this one, where would you advise someone to start with Pynchon, or where would you advise them to not start with Pynchon?
Right. Well, I appreciate it, and yeah, I did put a lot of thought and effort into trying to make a succinct kind of video content for my channel there to address this, simply because the amount of people that have never read any Pynchon that go for Gravity's Rainbow first, in my experience, is insane. And I've seen it time and time again. People that have never read any Pynchon, but they have Gravity's Rainbow sitting there, and they're like, well, I'm going to read that, and it's just not the way to go, because Pynchon is very, very strange. Pynchon is very weird. Pynchon, and people don't talk about how, he's erudite, he's complex, his language is on a very high level, and all this kind of thing, but they don't talk about how esoteric and how just high weirdness Pynchon is. And I think everybody needs to be kind of eased into that, depending, of course, on what you've come in contact with before in your reading. So I would unequivocally say you don't start with Gravity's Rainbow. You could start with V, like I did. I mean, when it comes down to it, you can start wherever you want. But I definitely, didn't really have my bearings with Pynchon after reading V. So I routinely suggest starting with Vineland or Inherent Vice or Bleeding Edge, and for different reasons. Vineland is almost like a quintessential Pynchon. I love Vineland so much. Loved it when I first read it, and it has all the strangeness with a strong story running through it. Systems and systems undermining other systems, and it's just one of those. And Vineland is anticlimactic in a very big way, and so Vineland will give you, if you like Vineland, you're going to love Pynchon. And Inherent Vice has the added boon of having a Paul Thomas Anderson movie made, so it kind of will help people to stay in the story, even though the movies go into it actually does a quarter of what's in that book, but it does do it well. I wish that I knew somebody that would watch it without ever seeing the movie or without ever reading the book to know if the movie works by itself, because I have no kind of bearing for that. But then Bleeding Edge, I suggest, because it's Pynchon does period pieces. He loves writing, in a certain time period, and you really get into those periods in which he writes. And Bleeding Edge is about the late 1990s and in New York. So late 1990s, early 2000s New York. So that is something that many readers nowadays have lived in that time, and so might have some accessibility there. And Bleeding Edge is beautiful. I mean, there's some of the most beautiful writing of Pynchon in that book, I think.
Okay, Seth, how about you? Where would you recommend as an entry point into Pynchon?
Do not start with Gravity's Rainbow. I will die on this hill. Um, really, there's a very particular reason why I say that. Because, I think a lot of people who would classify themselves as strong readers, they hear Gravity's Rainbow, one of the most difficult books of all time, and they say to that, hold my beer. And I think that's well, that's what I think a lot of us do. We come in with a bit of an ego, like, oh yeah, I can do this.
Right.
But what makes Gravity's Rainbow difficult relative to other works that are touted as, those kind of, you're not a true reader until you've read these. People say like Ulysses or Infinite Jest or one of those, is that the narrative, such as it is in Gravity's Rainbow, progressively fractures and dissolves throughout the book. It's something that is purpose built to make less and less sense the further you get into it. Whereas in previous works of his, he'll dilate out in the plot and with the themes, but then start to draw it back into something of a discernible conclusion. Gravity's Rainbow just gets more complex, more obscure, more abstract, and then it ends. And it is a profound, beautiful, shocking ending, but it just leaves you going, what the hell did I just read? And it's going to frustrate you. And I think that would alienate a lot of people coming into someone who actually doesn't have to be that difficult all the time. I almost unequivocally always tell people to start with The Crying of Lot 49 for a few reasons. It's relatively short. It gives you a very good sense of his humor, his style of characterization, the themes of paranoia and systems working outside the boundaries of our perception and our control. And I think he wraps things up nicely without tying an unnecessary bow on the end of the plot. Like, he leaves it open-ended. To those of us who had read it, you would know exactly. It's that last scene that really leaves you going, okay, you don't actually get to know how this is resolved. But it is a very good sort of taste tester into his work. So I tend to recommend Lot 49. I would also like to kind of push back on something you said there, Dave, which was referring to Inherent Vice in Vineland as Pynchon light. I've never liked that term for the specific reason that I don't think it's entirely fair. I think the people who coined Pynchon light are the people who love Gravity's Rainbow, which is a novel that's concept first and character second. And then they come into those novels after coming off of Gravity's Rainbow and go, oh, well, where's the complexity that I had come to expect in that previous work? And I think some people pride themselves on having finished Gravity's Rainbow, and then they almost feel a little unnecessarily protective of like the fact that, now he's writing books that are accessible to a wider audience. And they're like, oh, well, maybe, this little club that I was in isn't going to be so elite after all. That's kind of a pet theory. I don't know if that's based on any empirical evidence, but yeah, I've never loved the term Pynchon light. I think both those novels are absolutely fantastic, and two of his works that are the most well characterized of his entire biography. So that's my take for you.
No, it's interesting. It was actually Bleeding Edge rather than Vineland and Inherent Vice that I'd seen described as Pynchon light. I'd kind of go. I would pick one from each of your selections as the sort of starting point. I'd agree with Seth, Lot 49, because it is fairly short. Like you say, it does introduce some of his ideas, like paranoia and this idea that there's sort of something secretive. There's always secretive things going on in Pynchon books, which we'll talk about soon. And also Inherent Vice, because I think if you say to people it's a detective story, that will perhaps drag more people in than trying to explain what the hell a lot of his other books are about. But I do wonder if as well, Bleeding Edge, again, it's a similar thing. It's a sort of detective story as such. And so, like you were saying, Seth, I wonder if because they're not these massively thematic and complex books like Gravity's Rainbow, if they are seen as the lighter works, because they are more accessible, they are, probably going to draw a wider audience, and there is some sort of snobbery and elitism going on there in terms of people who like to be, I'm a serious Pynchon reader, almost not wanting, the masses to be able to engage with his work. But yeah, it's interesting because I definitely agree with Noah that Inherent Vice is a good starting point. I went to see the film with my wife and she hated it, but she's not the sort of person who'd read Pynchon. And then Lot 49 was my first introduction to his work, and again, one of the things I liked about it, which is something he does a lot, is the sort of counterculture thing. He's definitely a big fan of counterculture or writing about it, and you get that as well in Inherent Vice and some of his other books. And so I think the sort of musical references he makes as well in Lot 49 and in Inherent Vice and in his other works, both of those books are good introductions to those sort of themes. The next thing, and this was something, again, Seth, we kind of spoke about it earlier. He's quite a reclusive author. He doesn't give interviews. I think there's a couple of photos of him from a few years ago. I think he went to vote with his son, and I think that's literally one of the only sort of more recent photos of him that exists. Do you think this sort of reclusive personality feeds into the sort of mystery around him and his work?
Absolutely. I think it's quite integral into the world's perception of both him as an author and the works on their own merits. And I think part of the reason for that is that we can never fully know what he's up to. We can make as many Reddit group reads and online forums as we want, but we will never have it from the horse's mouth, He doesn't strike me as the type of guy who's ever going to do, at the end of his life, a tell-all career story with, the New York Times or something like that. I think he's going to die with whatever secrets he has. And I think because there's so much that is left open-ended and open to interpretation in his work, not having that certainty is what allows this mythos to continue.
Yeah, definitely. I know that there's been a few instances where he's thrown people off the scent. So when Gravity's Rainbow won the National Book Award, he actually sent someone else to collect it on his behalf.
I actually didn't know that.
Yeah, it's some sort of, from what I read it on Wikipedia, it's some sort of guy who was like a sort of comic who spoofed a scientist, I think, or some sort of professor, and people thought it was Pynchon, and it wasn't. And then as well, rumors abound that he put in a cameo in the Inherent Vice film, and so everyone was kind of searching for the little, the sort of the extras. Who is it? And they thought it was completely someone different. I don't know if either of you guys have seen the Simpsons episode, which he appears in, but he always has a paper bag over his head. And I think he narrated the sort of the trailer for the book of Inherent Vice, and that's literally it. Other than there's some sort of autobiographical stuff in the intro to Slow Learner, his short story collection, and a couple of photos from it, like his high school yearbook and stuff like that. There is literally nothing known about him, and I do think it's, Noah mentioned it, that kind of draws people in, because in this day and age of social media, authors doing interviews and book festivals and everything, he stands out up there with people like Salinger, maybe, Cormac McCarthy. I mean, McCarthy seems almost publicity friendly. He was on Oprah once in comparison. Yeah, I do think it kind of feeds into that. I mean, as you were saying, Noah, was that one of the main things that drew you into his work? The fact he was quite a reclusive and sort of mysterious author when you were younger?
It's definitely something that was intriguing. And I mean, when I first came in contact with it when I was younger like that, I'm talking about like 15, 16 years old. So yeah, I mean, at that point, this guy who writes crazy stuff that is, a mind blow, and also nobody knows who he is. This guy could, still go out and do whatever he wants with his life and not be hassled by people and things like that. Well, he's got it figured out, So it's something that I was definitely interested in. And I think, like you said there, Seth, it definitely adds to just the whole public mythos of Pynchon. And what is he, I will say there's been enough talk already where we've just kind of been saying the type of writer that Pynchon is. And I think one of the biggest draws to me is not, his anything mysterious about him. It is the fact that he writes differently every single book that I've ever read. Pynchon, what kind of writer is Pynchon? What does he do as an author? You could talk about each book singularly, and it's on another level from anybody else that I've ever heard of or read. He's just the big dog. He's the one that's out there that is doing something that nobody else has ever done. And I wouldn't be surprised if we get something like, I don't know if either of y'all have read Against the Day. We talked about what we've read.
I'm planning on leaving Against the Day for my very last one of his. I want to end on a high note.
It's amazing. It's definitely amazing. My last one will be Mason and Dixon. That's the only one I haven't read. But Against the Day, what he does is he plays with form, like the form of genre, in ways that I've never come in contact with. It's like a quintessential postmodern kind of experiment is what he's doing. And so I wouldn't be surprised if Pynchon has his own kind of, effed up memoir or something for us one day. You know what I mean? That will be released like after his death or something. It's like, it's just what he's capable of. There's no bounds. So that's the number one draw for me to Pynchon. And it has been every time I read something new, every time that I've read a new book by him, that it's always different than everything else that I've read by him. And it blows my mind that this is always the same author. It's amazing.
Okay, because that actually you've led on to something I was going to ask you guys about, which is what you enjoy reading about his work. So Seth, how about you? What do you love about Pynchon's writing?
So one of the things I really enjoy, I suppose, aside from, we can set aside the complexity for a minute here, he always struck me as someone who never took himself too seriously. Like, he is undeniably brilliant, and he's incredibly erudite, and he's just got this singular mind where he's able to interweave theme, narrative, plot, character in these helical, serpentine ways that really, I don't know many other people who can do it. But some of the authors out there who are on his level, and since I am speaking a little sort of disparagingly, I won't name any names here, but there are some who just, they can tell they take themselves incredibly seriously, and I'm capital L literature, whereas this is a guy who's willing to, if I just take a random thing out of Gravity's Rainbow, we're talking about the practicalities and ethics and implications of conditioning a person throughout their entire life to react to a particular stimulus. And then we find out one of the people behind that is a guy named after Porky Pig, Dr. Porkyevich. It's just like these random ways where he gets you going on these incredibly serious, impactful, ideas, and then just does something completely absurd with it. It's
Right.
really, and his ability to kind of vacillate back and forth between absurd and completely serious and not have it feel clunky or unnatural is just something that I find really refreshing. It keeps it fun as well as stimulating, I guess is the easiest way to think about it.
Yeah, definitely. I really agree with that. I was thinking about this question sort of over the past couple of days, and I thought, and I've read people say one of the things about him is he kind of dissolves the barriers between, for want of a better expression, sort of high art and low art, or high culture and low culture. You know, you'll be reading parts of Gravity's Rainbow. There were some really heartbreaking things about concentration camps and stuff like this, and you read them and you're almost in tears. And then earlier on in the book, there's a shit-eating BDSM scene. You're going, what? Like, how is this the same guy in the same book? Or sort of psychologically conditioning an octopus to attack someone as part of a scheme to kind of set something up. And it's just crazy, the range of his imagination, how well learned he is. He knows maths and physics and loads of science stuff, but at the same time throws in loads of pop culture references and stuff like that. And like you say, he doesn't take himself too seriously. He is a funny writer, yet can also write things which absolutely, blow your mind and sort of really stop you in your tracks when reading. So I think that's definitely one of his main strengths. He's not a serious author, and I think he has, because of how difficult in inverted commas Gravity's Rainbow seems to be in some of his other books. People maybe go in with that perception that he's a completely serious writer, and then perhaps find that he plays, he'll play around with you. He's having a joke, with you and stuff like that. And I think that's one of his strengths. Go and Noah, I think that you want to say something.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's this kind of thing where with Pynchon, labels don't work, and that's why that's why I kind of was getting at before with talking about this thing is like, you can't pin him down and you can't label Pynchon like this. I mean, Pynchon is a serious author. I mean, he's totally serious about what he's doing. It's not that. There's a lot of playfulness and this slapstick craziness in his books, and there's pop culture weaved all through it, and everything. It's amazing. But the most amazing thing is that Thomas Pynchon can be at the top of the game of writing and literature, and universally acknowledged as just an amazing writer, a genius, these kind of things, and always skirting the label of arrogant and pretentious. You don't ever hear those words when people are talking about a Thomas Pynchon novel. Why is it like that when his works are even almost the par excellence examples of what literature may be able to do, and he's always flexing. He's still flexing, that kind of thing. So it's just I love that, and I think that there's something to be said just the fact that arrogance, pretension, or pretense just doesn't come through in his writing as erudite and well learned and high level that it is. You feel like an everyman is sitting there telling you this story. He's we're all in the same boat. Pynchon's in the boat with us.
Yeah, sorry, go on. After you, Seth.
Please, thank you. Well, just if I may bounce off that for a second, I think part of the reason that we don't ascribe arrogance to him is that he's never done anything publicly as well to give us that impression. There have been, not to name any names here, but there have been writers in the past who have made serious blunders in the publicity world. And because this guy just doesn't exist in the public sphere, his work has to speak entirely on its own merits.
Right.
And one of the things that I think we haven't touched on in terms of what he does to reward the reader is his self-referentiality. And what I mean by that is, the more books of his you'll read, the more you'll see he's bouncing off of himself and his own ideas. He'll recur characters from previous books. Recent when I saw Mucho Mas, Oedipa's husband from Crying of Lot 49, he comes back in Vineland. Or you've got Pig Bodine from V, if I have that right. And then he flips back in Gravity's Rainbow. And he does all these different, I'm pretty sure Yo-Yo Dine also reappears in one of the later books. And the Cherry Coke name comes back. It's almost like the Marvel Cinematic Universe of literature, for lack of a better word. Like, he's got a lot of these interconnections, and I think that's always really enjoyable.
And how many authors? Wonderful. The highest level authors you already name dropped. Joyce. They create their own universe. Their literature is a universe, and if you're gonna do it on the highest level possible, then you just have to do that. It's not just literature that artists go to this level to create something new. It's art. It's poetry, it's literature, it's all creative endeavor. You really have to, and it's your universe. Pynchon is all through all these characters and all these situations, and just like Joyce was with his works, and William Blake is my boy. I love William Blake, and his mythos, his mythology that he created is so weird and so crazy that most people don't get it, but it's because it's so personal as well. These kind of characters that are recurring and come up and mean so much to the mythos are real people that had personal weight in the creators' lives, in the artists' lives. So it's just it's something. There's a dichotomy there where to enjoy these kind of things, you can't help but kind of fall into the artist's life and what they've gone through and how they frame experience in the world. And that's the whole kind of beauty, because you have somebody who is ultimately like the most generous kind of human to give this kind of thing to humanity in a creative endeavor. You can't help but bare your soul, like bare your all the darkness as well as all the hopefulness and everything in there. So it's all out on the table, and with Pynchon, it's crazy as hell.
Definitely. One thing, actually, going back to what you were saying about how he's not had this label of being a pretentious author that perhaps others have. One thing one of my friends once said to me is Pynchon talks up to his audience. He doesn't talk down. You were saying about the sort of everyman thing. He'll bring you on the journey, and he won't, like, he'll sort of fill in the blanks sometimes, but he almost expects you to, like, come on guys, like, you need to bring yourselves up here, and you can do this kind of thing. It's rather than kind of going, well, I'm not going to cover these difficult topics or whatever because you just won't understand it. Let's churn out some sort of simplistic explanations or dumbed down literature. He's like, no, guys, we've got this. Come with me, and I'll. It's almost like pulling you up, if that makes sense. And when my friend said that at first, I thought, really? Because
I think so.
Yeah, but I do agree with that. His works are fractured and crazy, and can be quite difficult, but they're never done in a way where you think he's trying to show off how much better he is than everyone else, so how much more intelligent he is than his audience. He doesn't write in a way where he tries to put himself on a pedestal above everyone else. And I think that's perhaps one of his most endearing qualities, that you can read his books, and you might not get everything. And one thing we'll talk about in a sec, which I think Seth's mentioned before, is you don't always get the sort of resolution um, with his books you perhaps want, but there is definitely a feeling that he doesn't see himself as a sort of intellectual heavyweight above everyone else, I suppose, is what I'm trying to say in a roundabout way.
I get what you're saying. I think you're spot on as well. Because what it is Pynchon doesn't frame himself in the ways that we have in the beginning talked about Pynchon, which is why I kind of went into this kind of thing. But we do that. The readers do that. The readers frame Pynchon as this genius, amazing writer, whatever. He doesn't do that. Though the texts are really, he'll drag you through the muck with him. Anybody who's read Gravity's Rainbow knows that that's the truth. And just say, hey, this is me. And it's really just an openness. It's there's something beautiful and ultimately human, very, very human about that, about, just the overall, what he kind of does. I see him as just, he's really at the top of my list, that's for sure. So it's a pleasure to go ahead.
Well, not to belabor this point too much longer, but just kind of to draw it out just a little further here. We're all saying he doesn't take the reader's intelligence for granted, which I think is a really important quality. And he's not adversarial in his difficulty. There are people like Joyce who explicitly tried to make some of his work, like Finnegan's Wake. He has said it himself. This was meant to be difficult. This was meant to be something that was almost impenetrable, right?
Right.
But the complexity here, I think, is the ends as well as the means. And what I mean by that is they are complex to serve a purpose. You look at something like Mason and Dixon, okay? That is it's a Matryoshka doll of nested frame narratives, okay? Stories within stories within stories within the outer story of the cherry coke tale being told to the kids in front of the LaSpark hearthrug, okay? But the purpose of that is to illustrate how history is transmitted from one generation to the next through these sort of fireside tales, right? Or Gravity's Rainbow, the complexity there, a narrative that fractures and dissolves as it goes through, I think is meant to reflect the psychology of people who lived through that time. What is the V2? It is an absolute nightmare. It is a rocket that disintegrates you before you even hear it coming. What do you think that would do to your psychology, living through that for years on end, walking down your street, go into the grocery store, and you could be obliterated just like that any second, right? And I think the complexity of that narrative is to put the reader in a headspace of what the psychology of living through that might be like. Or Inherent Vice. It's an inverted detective novel. Rather than making more sense as you go through, it makes less sense as you go through. And what's going on with Doc Sportella the entire time? He's stoned out of his mind. What do you think is going to happen? Right? And so the point I'm trying to make here is that the complexity serves a purpose each time, and it's a different purpose each time. It's not just there to be, haha, look how hard this is,
Right. I think you're exactly right. And it's every book. There's something new and different that he's getting at with every book. And it's just that he can do it. And thank God that we have somebody here that has done that, done it for us like this. It's a beautiful experience reading Pynchon. I can't wait to read Mason and Dixon.
Oh, mate, you both are in for an outstanding time. My all-time favorite novel right there.
Wow, that's big claim to make. I still have that and Against the Day, so I've saved the two of the big ones towards the end. I've got those, and
Beautiful.
I think Vineland, O and V, they're the four I've got left to do. Um, Something again, we've sort of touched upon it a little bit. What do you think are the main themes or the sort of recurring themes in Pynchon's work? We've kind of spoke about paranoia, um, systems against systems, or sort of uh, trying to think of a way of framing it. You know, in Gravity's Rainbow, he talks a lot about the sort of shady elite who are kind of controlling the strings and stuff like that. Other than those, what do you guys think? We'll start with you, Seth, maybe. Are the sort of main themes in Pynchon's work?
I'm going to try and blend this question and draw in a little bit with what we were talking about with his reclusivity and how we can't really know what he's up to. Okay. Um, I think that Pynchon has an inherent mistrust of systems of control, whether that be governmental or political or anything of that nature. Okay.
Yeah.
And that is probably one of the most pervasive themes across every single one of his works. And I've always wondered where this came from. Okay. And he wouldn't necessarily classify himself as a Pynchon scholar, but there's a guy out there. He's an author, Michael S. Judge. You should look him up if you haven't. And he has done probably the deepest dive into Gravity's Rainbow short of Weisenberger. Okay.
Nice.
And his proposition was, and I'm going to try and throw in a little bit of history, but pretty quickly here. So I believe it was the early 60s, the US conducted what was called Operation Paperclip, where 1,600 German rocket scientists were brought over from the zone, such as it was at the time, to the US. Okay. And purpose of that was to take their intelligence and their technology that they were working on at the time and put it into the American military industrial complex. I'm kind of simplifying things here, but these were the people who worked on the V2, and a lot of the technology that powered that particular rocket informed later military applications in the US. Okay. One thing I can remember off the top of my head is the X-20 Dinosaur, which is a particular rocket that the US used later on down the track. Okay. I am going to arrive at a point here. One of the companies that got the contracts to develop some of this stuff was actually Boeing in the 1960s. And who was working as a technical underwriter at Boeing at the time? Thomas Pynchon. So the proposition that Judge has offered is that Pynchon saw something or saw some things at the time in Boeing that freaked him out and that he probably felt complicit in, because he's working in a country that's taking really destructive technology and putting it to their own means or to their own end, I suppose. And I think that maybe I agree with that, and that could be one of the sources of his skepticism and mistrust for power and control systems, is seeing the ways that they subjugate us and then implicate us in the things that they do. I hope that makes a little bit of sense. But I guess one of the points I'm trying to arrive at is I think he is always interested in the dichotomy between those who have power and the systems of control that are in power and those who don't. Those who don't, namely being the counterculture, which you talked about earlier, Dave.
Yeah, definitely. And as well, I think he served in the US Navy.
He did.
I think it was after he graduated from college, and so again, I wondered if that gave him a sort of distrust of hierarchy, power, authority. Yeah, when you started to talk about the rocket and who had the contract to Boeing, I thought, all right, I know where he's going with this. Like you said, he did work as a technical underwriter for Boeing, and so that probably did, I think, and obviously that's where a lot of his knowledge of maths and physics and rocket technology, all the stuff he used in Gravity's Rainbow, probably came from. Another theme that people often associate with his work is entropy, especially in Gravity's Rainbow. Now, I've tried to wrap my head around this. It's something like it's the measure of how much work is available in a system, something like that. You guys might know more than I do. And from what I gather, the larger the system, there's a tendency to sort of towards chaos. Basically, the bigger something is, the less control you have over it. I don't know if that's anything either of you guys have read. So Noah, you're nodding. Do you want to jump in on this?
Well, I mean, entropy being a major theme that he touches on for sure. It's the tendency of systems to break down, and in Pynchon's work, systems always break down. It doesn't matter if it's these corporate systems, government systems that he's talking about. In Vineland, the CIA operative over here, basically running amok on his own, damning the whole the whole structure just so he can get a woman that he's obsessed with, something like that. Just ridiculous. But also, as in a thematic way, nothing more than in Gravity's Rainbow for sure. There's a couple short stories. There's a short story in Slow Learner called Entropy, if I'm not mistaken, and it just drives it home, and shows an early how Pynchon is early framing this kind of idea. But there's no neat buttoning up Pynchon's works because he is interested in that kind of thing, and it kind of runs through a lot of his work. As far as I want to say that the way that Pynchon applies ideas like entropy, we don't want to go from a textbook understanding of it and apply it to Pynchon's works, because he's not doing that. It is his own way of applying an idea and making and working it out through a story. Inherent Vice, for example. I mean, what a cluster Inherent Vice is, and it's beautiful and awesome, and I love it. But near the end, not the absolute end, even though that's a lot of chaos as well. But in the end, or in the almost end, there's just an unbelievable scene where you're like, what? Does anything ever make any sense anymore? And and you realize you're right where Thomas Pynchon wants you to be. That that's about all I got to say on entropy, to tell you the truth.
No, I like the thing you were saying about sort of not knowing where you are. His works, I find it, and I know Seth and I spoke about this before, putting this episode together, is you don't get the neat endings with Pynchon. He never, and we have kind of mentioned this earlier, you never get the whole happy ending or the sad ending or even really the ending, right. other than the text stops and there's no more words, there's no more pages, and because
you're still going on, and Pynchon is still going on, and I think it's part, and that's a big part of it. He knows what he's doing.
Yeah, and he's not an author who gives people that sort of neat resolution that I think often people aim for in terms of very predictable narrative structures. We find in most novels we don't really get that with him. It's often quite open-ended. You're never sure what's going on. In Inherent Vice, who is or who are the Golden Fang? In Gravity's Rainbow, what happens to some of the characters? What was the Rocket and all this kind of stuff? Right. Bleeding Edge, it's been a while since I've read it, but again, I can remember getting to the end of it and going, like, what just happened? Like, were all the loose ends tied up? Not really. Right. And yeah, I think that's something that might put some readers off him, and it's something I do want to talk about soon is what kind of readers do you think it'll appeal to? But I do think that, trying to think of a way of explaining this, it is one of his sort of trademark things. It's not a theme as such, but it's this idea of in a very sort of postmodern way that there is no sort of absolute truth. You can never quite get to the bottom of things. That seems to be something that crops up in his work again and again and again.
I think
reflects.
Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say it reflects life and reality quite well, I think. Really, if you think about, like, here's a kind of simple way of looking at it. Were you ever at an age where you said to yourself, okay, when I get blank, I'm going to have it all figured out? Or when I'm at this age, I'm going to have it all figured out and life's going to be good. And then you get to that point and there's a whole new set of things you need to figure out, right?
Right.
It's this idea, if you can keep climbing these tiers of, progressions in whatever sense you want to think of, progressions in complexity, progressions in time in a linear sense or whatever, but there never really is a nice whole conclusive resolution to everything in life or in reality. And I think his work reflects that nicely. And it, again, to not take the reader's intelligence for granted, he doesn't need to tie things up in a bow for you, because you can do a bit of the work yourself. You can tie the bow up however much you need it to be,
Yeah, he's not trying to explain something to you. He's trying to illustrate he's trying to illustrate, and if that, I think other than on and above entropy, I think one of the main things that works out in as a theme of Thomas Pynchon's novels is paranoia, and not just paranoia, but it's the thing that people don't trust each other. So there's all these systems and structures that are built that are all antagonistic towards each other, or undermining each other, or just working on different levels. And either way, they're untrustful of each other. Humans don't work together. They don't work together. And how he explores that kind of stuff is limitless. It's amazing.
Yeah, definitely. Sorry, go on, sir.
No, I think I think maybe he does believe that people can work together, but in small groups or in groups together, because there are always collectives or groups of people against other people. There's always kind of a dichotomy or a separation between, the counterculture and the conformists, for lack of a better word.
There's definitely
across all of his work.
There's definitely an affinity for that kind of thing, for the counterculture, for the communal type of society, a collective where it is people working together. There is an affinity for that, but especially like in Vineland, you see a system working to destroy that, and then also in Inherent Vice, you see a lot of undermining of that, or just how the individuals, if the individuals aren't on the level, then it doesn't work out, and there's a lot of that kind of thing where we work against ourselves. So I think with that kind of thing, and see, Thomas Pynchon never gives you a character that has it all figured out and is, he kind of maybe this is a way that he skirts the kind of pretentious, arrogant kind of label by not giving you somebody or even a character in his works that's going to be like a mouthpiece and say, this is what's really going on. This is what the answer is. This is what it is. This is what you should do. This is how you should be. Any of that, it's all just suggestive at best.
If he gave us that singular answer, we wouldn't still be talking about him, though. That's the thing, is the fact that we will never have that resolution, because we can't know. We can only postulate. Dave?
Right.
Absolutely. Sorry, I had the phone going off in the background there. So yeah, had to go deal with that. Yeah, I think the thing you were saying there about people working against each other and not together. You know, in Inherent Vice, Doc Sportello doesn't quite know if he can trust Bigfoot, or Shasta and characters like that. In Gravity's Rainbow, Slothrop is always with Katya. He's like, can I trust her, etc., etc. There's always these things where you're never quite sure who your friends or who your enemies are up in his novels. And that's something that does occur time and time again, I think, in a lot of his books. The next thing I wanted to ask you guys about is what sorts of readers do you think he would appeal to? There's various people in my life I would just, stay away from. My wife, she would not like Pynchon at all, right? and you know what? She's into her stuff. I'm into mine. We have occasional whatever. Are there any, I guess, maybe an easy way of framing this, are there any other authors you can think of where if someone went, hey, I liked so-and-so, you would say, right, try some Pynchon? So Noah, how about you start that one?
Anybody that is interested in what literature can do with limits and boundaries of literature, or trying to, if you like experimental fiction, if you like speculative fiction in any kind of way, there's a Pynchon for you. Like I said, Pynchon really does an unbelievably wide swath of literature, and like what he does, in every book being unique, that I would that's also why it's so hard to suggest a where to start with Thomas Pynchon across the board, because different readers, different people are going to be more acclimated, or kind of be able to drop into Pynchon at a different place, I think. So yeah, I mean, as far as who is ready for Pynchon, I mean, you gotta want to be an ambitious reader and want an ambitious writer. That's for sure. Anybody who wants an ambitious text, that's Pynchon's for you.
Yeah, Seth, how about you? Any sort of similar? I mean, Noah, you've not really suggested any authors, but I do get your idea. He's showing us a lovely copy of Gravity's Rainbow at the moment over our Zoom chat. I've got the other cover actually, which is this one. Not quite as nice as the. He's showing off his collection now. We're all doing it. We've all got different copies. We're absolute Pynchon nerds over here. Yeah, so no, you kind of spoke about the kind of qualities of the reader. They're an ambitious reader. Seth, do you agree? Or, are there any authors who, you mentioned like DeLillo before, Oster. Do you think, having read those guys, that if someone enjoyed those, they should read Thomas Pynchon?
They're not the first two people that come to mind now that I've read a bit of all of them. I do struggle to find someone who I relate closely to him. I think a couple names I might throw out would be William Gaddis and William H. Gass, I think are close. I have heard people make the comparison of Wallace before. I don't agree with that. I think those are incredibly different authors. I think the only reason people compare them is due to the difficulty. With regards to the qualities, I hesitate to use the word ambitious because it's hard to not use that term without wrapping it up with implications of difficulty and complexity. I think I would be more tempted to use the word patient. You need to have someone who is willing to be comfortable with not having all the answers, not being given all the answers and all the pieces for a while, and probably not being given all of them even by the end of the story. You need to be comfortable with open-ended endings. You
Yeah.
need to be
Journey, not the end, right?
well, yeah, exactly, you
Yeah.
know. I think I also think it's really important to be someone who likes to reread, because I think his works really do reward the person who comes back to them for a second, third, fourth treatment. And you need to be willing to go into the extra textual stuff, you know, the regardless of whether or not we think he's approachable, there is a complexity in terms of the referentiality across everything: pop culture, history, science, mathematics, you name it, it's all there. You know, there's no one out there short of maybe, I don't know, Harold Bloom and Michael Silverblatt who are going to get all of that first time around. You have to be willing to, oh, if you don't understand this, do your Googling, do your research, use your reader guides, you know, crack open Weisenberger. That's a compendium of you know, that's an indispensable companion right there for Gravity's
Yeah.
Rainbow.
Right.
So just, yeah, someone who's patient and willing to get into the granular details, I think.
That's a good
That's
answer.
fair. Definitely fair.
Yeah.
I'll say, I mean, I love Gaddis. I love Gaddis, and I have just come in contact with Gaddis over the last year and a half, and I mean, there's Gaddis is a close to Pynchon in my heart. I love Gaddis, and there's something to be said about the chaos and the kind of complexity that's built in Gaddis's works that maybe Pynchon drew from. I know that there's this. I mean, I haven't done a reread of V because I read it so long ago. I haven't done a reread of V since I've read the Recognitions to kind of see if there's any intertextuality between the socialites in Recognitions and the Holsick crew of V, but I've heard allusions to that kind of thing in different, you know, some essay or something that I read on Gaddis. So I definitely concur with the Gaddis being somebody who, and I mean, I'm no doubt that Pynchon read Gaddis.
Well, he has cited him as an influence before. I mean, granted, I can't pull a source up on that, so, you know, take my word with a grain of salt. But I have read that he has stated that he is an influence, and I could see that definitely with these sort of ensemble casts, kind of an absence of a main character across most of his works, save a handful, really. And I actually just had one other thought relating him to other authors. And I think this is going to come across as a little bit weird, but if you just stay with me a moment, I do think he shares a lot of connective tissue with the Beats. Okay. And I think part of that, it would be his interest in the counterculture, right? And think about it. This is a guy who went to Cornell University at the exact same time that all the Beats, Ginsberg and Kerouac, and then we're hanging out in Greenwich Village, just down the way. And Pynchon, great friends with Richard Farina, right? He was quite a notable Beat himself, more in the musical community than the literary side. But this idea of having a counterculture or counter force, if you will, see what I did there, pushing back on control systems, I think you would find a lot of that interest, at least from sort of a sociological standpoint, across the works of, you know, Kerouac, Ginsberg.
Right. Well, and it's the
Lunch,
paranoia towards, the paranoia towards the governmental structure as well. Paranoia referring to politics all across the board. Yeah. And I mean, so I think you're right. Pynchon does, you know, kind of fit squarely into that, especially with all the, you know, I've had people come at me talking about Inherent Vice and stuff and saying, oh, well, I liked it, but, you know, why all the hippy dippy astrology and stuff, you know? And I'm like, man, you know, this is, he's not touting it, but that's what, you know, these people were into. And you're not going to not talk about something that is part of who they are or something like that. And that's just the kind of thing, this kind of free love getting stomped down by the knowledge of right and wrong, the justice system, right?
Definitely. I think I was laughing before with what Seth was saying about you need to be patient. You need to look at the reader's guide. When I was reading Inherent Vice, I literally had my desktop open with there's a wiki for it, for all the little references, and I was sat there like, that's reference. Okay, this refers to some obscure '60s surf band. Thank you. And moving on, and then Gravity's Rainbow again. I think there are off the top of my head, there are sections of untranslated German. There's stuff on the rocket technology. Seth, you mentioned Operation Paperclip, and that's in essence the whole thing of trying to find the B2 and stuff like that. A lot of that ties in with Gravity's Rainbow, and so yeah, I do think like I said, there's people doing illustrated guides and stuff like this. He's the kind of author where if you are willing to dig a little deeper into it and not just read what's on the page, to go off on the references and stuff, you'll get a lot more out of it. And I think that's I like that kind of thing. I like where I'm the kind of person who goes on Wikipedia rabbit holes where I'll be reading one thing and then I click on this and then half an hour later I'm reading, I don't know, about Nigerian cuisine or something like that, having started off with the Toronto Blue Jays, and I have no idea how the hell I got there. And I do think that is one of the good things about his work is he allows you to dive into these topics that he explores, these little references in a way that very few authors actually do.
And that's not for everyone, Some people want something that is a straightforward A to B narrative that they can escape in, and they can just have it, let them take them, and they don't have to work too hard. Right. And that's fine. That's perfectly valid. If that is the type of reader you are, he's probably not for you. But right. If you are the rabbit hole type who, what does that line mean? What is that word? What is that name? And you want to go start looking down the YouTube, the Wikipedia, the Reddit rabbit holes to find the meaning. Boy, oh boy, you should see how deep some people have dug.
I bet. If you like that kind of thing, I will say I just had recently read Foucault's Pendulum, Umberto Eco. If you love that book, you're a Pynchon reader. Go ahead and get it. The associations, there's just like endless associations with different degrees of tenuous nature to it. It's awesome.
That's another book I've had for many, many years, and it's kind of been on the shelf staring at me going, I'm complex, I'm difficult. And it's the kind of thing where same with the Cult of the Cactus Boots, actually, which we mentioned before we came on, which Noah's been a big evangelist for, and I'm really enjoying. But at the moment, I've been mad busy with everything, work and various other things. And I think those are the kind of books where they work better when you kind of have quieter periods of your life. Sounds a bit weird, but when you're on holiday, I say that as a teacher because I get more time off than most jobs. So now, like for the next couple of weeks, I'll be able to read in the evenings and not be worried about my job the next day. I think things like Gravity's Rainbow, I actually read over my Christmas break, which seems weird. Like, you're off for Christmas, read Gravity's Rainbow, but it was the kind of book like Foucault's Pendulum where I think you need to not have many distractions. The kind of books where you don't want to be 3 pages a night because you'll be reading it for a year or 2 years or 3 years kind of thing. Those big sort of chunky novels that have a sort of difficult reputation. Weirdly, they're the kind of books that I would actually take on holiday with me, which sounds insane because most people get some sort of easy read at the airport and off they go, and a couple of crime books or some thrillers. But in terms of how I read, they're the ones that when I have calmer periods of time, they're the kind of books that appeal to me the most, if that makes sense, rather than having, just trying to blast through 6 quick reads when I've got 2 weeks off. I'd rather go for one epic thing. So Mason and Dixon, Against the Day, they're the kind of things I will save when I've got 6 weeks off in the summer, and they will be my summer reads. That's how I would work
Mate,
on those books.
I mean, on vacation, just because you mentioned that, unpopular opinion, but I'm going to say it. Inherent Vice is a beach read. I have read that book on the beach. It is perfect for it, right? You know what? This Pynchon as a vacation novel can work. All right, you can live your dream here. I promise you.
Yeah, it's set on the coast. It's totally a beach read. I just got a couple more questions to ask you guys. One of them will not the next question I'll ask, but one is related to something Seth posted about recently. What do you guys think Thomas Pynchon's legacy will be? I know that's probably quite a difficult question. Maybe Noah's kind of going, "Oh God, I can see that expression." Seth, let's start with you on this one. Let's give Noah some time to gather his thoughts. When he eventually goes, as I think Noah mentioned before, we don't know how much more of his work we're going to be getting. He's 84, I think.
Something like that.
Yeah, you mentioned Harold Bloom before, and I remember reading once he said the greatest living authors were McCarthy, Roth, who the others? DeLillo, and Pynchon. I was like,
Philip Roth.
yeah, and
Philip
obviously,
Roth.
and
I'm
obviously,
reading this for a second. Go ahead, Seth.
and obviously, Roth left his mortal coil a few years ago. Yeah, just when he does go, what do you think he will be remembered for? What's his place sort of in literature, I suppose?
I'm pretty sure I could see Noah just percolating over there. He's probably going to have a longer spiral here than I've got to offer. But I think he'll probably be remembered as someone who pretty aptly captured what America was at very specific points in time. Mason and Dixon, you've got the formation of America, obviously. In Gravity's Rainbow, you've got America during the tail end of World War II. Vineland, you've got, just the end of Nixon's tenure and the introduction of Reaganomics and the war on drugs and how was that was changing at the time. And my understanding is Bleeding Edge is very focused around 9/11. So I think he'll be remembered as someone who really wanted to dissect very particular moments in American history with granular detail. People have referred to him as postmodernism, and I recently had a bit of a rant on social media about this, kind of decrying that term. I would actually prefer to refer to him as hysterical realism. That term was coined by James Wood, I believe, and he described it as a genre that was typified by elaborately absurd prose, plotting, and characterization, but then also really careful, detailed investigations into real life social phenomenon. And I think that captures Pynchon nicely. He gets way out there into the abstract and the absurd, but he never gets away from things that do have grounding in reality. And they are very American centric. So I think that's kind of going to be a lot of what he's remembered for.
Hey Noah, have you had time to gather your thoughts on this? Yeah, do you want to have a go?
I'll have a go at it, that's for sure. And I think you're right, Seth. But what I will add just onto what you said is like Pynchon's not concerned and at historicity necessarily. He definitely is does his research and is amazing with, and I haven't read Mason and Dixon, so I still need to jump into that. But it's the history of people and the history of thinking and the lives of people in America, and it's essentially a quintessential like American novelist, sure, and period pieces, like I said before. But how will Pynchon be remembered? I think as the greatest. I mean, in any conversation, he's going to be one of the greatest American novelists that's ever lived and ever put stuff out there. It's going to be studied. It's going to be lauded for the long haul. And I would say the greatest for sure, because he's it's not in terms of quantity, but the quality is unbelievable of what he has put out there. He's worked and his whole life as a writer, done amazing stuff, and it is on a level that is unparalleled. I love it that he has been able to do it through to old age, and his latest stuff is not this kind of think about Gaddis's last novel or something, this kind of he has stayed fresh, new, doing new stuff, doing unexpected things with literature the whole time that he's written. And I think that knowing Pynchon, not that I know Pynchon, but knowing Pynchon the way that I think I know Pynchon, I think we can expect one or two more novels from him, even if it's just posthumously. And it's going to be, he's the GOAT. He's the giant. And who's really right there on the level with him? I would say, nobody.
Seth has already he's kind of jumped the gun on the next question. I was going to say, do you think he can be classed as postmodern? Because he has this, I think once, you described him before Seth's dissection of the term postmodern recently as probably the GOAT of postmodern authors. And he very much is associated with that movement, isn't he?
Against the Day. This book, Against the Day, is a quintessential postmodern exploration. Well, what does that mean? What does postmodernism mean? There's like 6 different genres, maybe 7 different genres that are being implored in this book to tell a huge sweeping epic. That's what it is. So a quintessential postmodern work. This one is what I say, because it is doing something that I can't see any other way to kind of classify what it is that I think this book is doing.
Seth, do you want to jump in on that, or any sort of final thoughts on Pynchon? Because I know, Seth, you've got to leave us soon, you were saying.
Yeah, it was more recently, I was just pushing back on not necessarily what postmodernism as a term was meant to be, but what I think I've seen it kind of become lately is obviously it was a counterpoint to modernism. And, some people argued against this, but I stated that one of the central kind of tenets of modernism was that grand narratives and absolute truths exist. And postmodernism was intended to push back on that, whether it be an absence of grand narratives or a subversion of them, as well as features of irony and skepticism, self-referentiality, etc. And, a lot of those features are present in Pynchon's work. I don't argue that. It was more that I seem to see the word postmodernism co-opted nowadays just to mean kind of anything that's difficult and complex. And I think that gets back to this idea is if that's how you want to define Pynchon as a whole, that's pretty reductive. And I think that's underselling what he is. Because if you reduce him down to complexity, you discount a lot of the talent he has that exists independently of that complexity. I've criticized him in certain books for lacking characterization. I think Gravity's Rainbow is a little weak in the characters, where it's strong in the concepts. But then you come off the back of that with Vineland, and that is an incredibly strong character-focused novel. And Inherent Vice, too, where that really is the aspect that shines, And I'm not going to lie, I immediately forgot where I was going with that point. But there you go. That's what I got to say on that.
On point. You're exactly on point with it, Seth. And this book, I mean, Against the Day, is the most character-driven novel.
I'm so excited for it.
It's beautiful and the most reader-friendly. If the content wasn't so hardcore in part 4, that's called Against the Day, where we meet my favorite character. It's just a heartbreaking and an amazing character. His name is Cyprian. But if it wasn't for that, I would say this is the number one kind of place you should start with Pynchon, because it's just stories. It's story forward. It's all about, it's so readable. It's beautiful. It's awesome. It's an amazing book, and it's character driven as well. So, but this is what I said is like the quintessential postmodern novel. You know what I mean? Just because I'm defining it and using the term postmodernism as to using he's imploring all different genres. There's a Western, there's a sci-fi, there's a memoir, there's a Bildungsroman, there's all these different genres, and there's a noir, like a hard-boiled detective novel in here, and they're all happening at the same time in a singularity of place and time, of the place being our world in an alternate an alternate Earth, but the time period being leading up to World War I. And it's awesome. I mean, it's just awesome. But what it does is unlike anything else, just like almost all Pynchon novels, right?
Seth, I'm thinking buddy read at some point.
Oh, mate, absolutely.
Neither
I'm so here for it. Next year, I intend to take down probably Bleeding Edge and Slow Learner, and then I think I'm gonna do V back to back with Against the Day in 2023. That's kind of the plan I have.
Okay, I will hold off on it until then. Just sort of
yes.
We will read this one. I like how we're plotting our reading 2 years in advance. That's insane.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, definitely. One thing actually, just to sort of finish off, I wanted to say about the term postmodern. I don't know, like when I read Kurt Vonnegut, that smacks of postmodernity to me. Sometimes it's absurd. It kind of breaks the fourth wall and stuff like that. And I agree, Seth, that the term seems to be used for anything long and complicated. And you can get really long books that aren't particularly complicated, and you can get really short books that have features of postmodernism, which they're not ridiculously crazy, they're not convoluted and stuff like that. But you kind of get the absurdity in there, the intertextuality, the skepticism and things like that. And I do think as a term, it's just almost become used as anything which is almost after a certain period of time. And I've seen some of Cormac McCarthy's books described as postmodern, and I don't get that kind of vibe with his work at all. That like Blood Meridian is just a western, and a lot of the Border trilogy, they are just westerns, and The Road is just a guy and his son like at the end of the world, and none of them have the kind of. I remember reading what you posted and just thinking, I'd struggle to kind of put my finger on what makes something a postmodernist book, but in my head I have an idea, and when I read something I can go, I kind of like Catch-22 to me as well, Hella. That feels very postmodern. It's quite absurd. It's there are characters with really stupid names. Again, that's the kind of thing Pynchon does. But I do think, like you said,
yeah, in Pynchon.
Yeah, major for Catch-22. Yeah, some of Pynchon's names as well, Oedipus, Mass, and all this kind of stuff. And I think, it is perhaps an overused term and has become used as a catch-all for anything which people assume falls into the category of postmodern and perhaps doesn't. Anyway, guys, I know Seth, you've got to shoot off soon, so we'll wrap it up there. Thank you both so much for joining me. yeah, it's been an absolute pleasure. I need to get to bed because it's like 20 to 1 in the morning here. Seth, you go and enjoy your day in Sydney. Noah, enjoy what's rested the left of your day. Thanks a lot, guys.
Thank you very much. This was a pleasure. Amazing. Wonderful, guys.
Yeah, Dave, this was a great time. Thanks so much for having us on, and I would love to come back in the future, whether it be on Pynchon or someone else. I've got a number of other names I would love to get just so nerdy out with you. So
Right.
Yeah, slide them in my DMs, as I believe the expression is, and
absolutely.
we'll talk about them, guys. See you both later. Thank you.